Here we go. Day 16. This is Monday, and as you can see there, week 9, there's the date. So, routing and switching, we have VLAN topics, finish up chapter 6, access control list topics, how we filter traffic, talk about skills check. Tatanka State Bank. Most of their work would be in-house. They're going from Windows 7, or wherever they're at, to Win 10. That's one of the big projects they're doing, plus some other stuff. And so this led us to the discussion: infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. These companies, how much are they moving to the cloud, and how much are they doing in-house? And we mentioned a little bit software design networks and software design WANs. Those would be topics that these students will be talking about a year from now. Okay, so here we're looking at our network. We think about the internal parts of the network. We have firewall connected to the external. We have this address that we ping a lot in here. And then we have some examples: device 32, 21, 22. All these devices are connected in. And then we do our network configurations out here. And this was a start of configuring switched virtual interfaces. We can assign IP addresses to VLANs inside those multi-layered switches. And we had a couple scenarios here in which the students were connecting. We had VLAN 20 here as an example, and this was switch 30. Okay, so this whole idea of over here, this is the old legacy idea where you had a router and you had sub interfaces, and then you had a trunk here connected to the router. And those sub interfaces would have IP addresses for your VLANs. Well, now we can do those right inside the multi-layered switches using these switch virtual interfaces, assigning IP addresses right to the VLANs. This is really old school. Alright, so this was our first setup in which we worked on this. Now, on that multi-layered switch, you have ports. Okay, 24 ports, or in some cases, some of our switches are 48 ports. And so you have a port. The port can be an access port, so you would have something like a PC connected, maybe an access point here with a printer. Okay, so these things can communicate through an access point. And then these ports, let's just arbitrarily pick this, they could be on a VLAN. Okay, so let's say those two are on the same VLAN. Then a port can be a trunk. So we can have the scenario where we connect another switch and we can have a trunk between there. Now that trunk would allow us to tag, for example, if we were going from here to a red up here VLAN, when that traffic wants to move across this trunk, it'll get tagged marking which VLAN it is. So that, let's say a red one. So when it comes into this switch, it'll be on the VLANs that have the ports on those in that particular switch. Now we can also create a router port. We can type in no switch port and turn on and assign that switch port an address. So maybe we have this scenario. We're going to connect this to a router and maybe some WAN connection there. That's supposed to be a WAN connection. Looks like an N. And then this port can be a switch. You can say no switch port and you can assign it an IP address. This would have an address on that same network. Okay? And so then they can communicate just like a router to a router. And then somewhere we talked about firewalls. And connect to a firewall. Firewalls can do DHCP and NAT. VLANs we talked about. Access ports, trunk, or router in terms of doing this in a multi-layered switch. Alright, this was our new example. Okay, I forgot. I wish I would have made that a 19, but that's okay. So we use this a long time. Students had their devices and so forth. And we have a picture of that too, where we well here, we were able to look at this was an address they're going to do on their network, and then we had to subnet that. Had to subnet that address into different networks so we could satisfy our VLANs. Okay. Yeah, we had the router, and we had a multi-layered switch, and then a layer 2 switch. And the students configured all this. Let me double check something here. Alright. Yep. Next page. A little confusing there. Still on week 9. Day 17. Wednesday. March 29th. The Internet of Things. Students could participate. Class started working some access lists. Unit 1 through 5 testing. These were the VLANs we're working with. We'll take a look at that on the next slide. I helped the students. We subnet. So we use this one as an example. Now we have these 8 bits that we can do with whatever we want, right? This was the address given to us, so we can't change any of those. I mentioned that we wanted to be able to have $16 networks. So we borrowed 1, 2, 3, 4 bits. 4 bits, if you were to draw all those out, would give us 16 networks. Now host, there's 14. There are 16 combinations here, but we can't use 0 because of the network, and we can't use all 1s because of the broadcast. So we have 14 combinations. So we assigned to VLAN 10 this first network, which would be this one. So that would be all 0s. That's where that 0 comes from. So the first address would be a 1, and the last one would be a 14. If you're wondering how that worked, you know, really the first one we put a 0, 0, 0, and a 1 right there. That's where the 1. And the 14 would be 1, 1, 1, 0. That'd be 14. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. That's 8, 4, and 2. And then the next one starts at 17, 1 more than 16, and ends at 30, 2 less than 32. And you can build all these networks. And then we assign these networks to the different VLANs, because they each need their own network. Then we did an example here of an access list. Talk more about that here in a minute. Alright, so here again is the addressing, and we have this scenario here. We have to make sure we turn on the routing inside the multi-layered switch. We have the trunk. This would just be a no switch port, be a router port connecting to the router, a trunk to the multi-layered switch, and we have our different VLANs. Create and assign our VLANs. You have to calculate the mask for /28, and then you can do the addressing. So here's the scenario again. Nothing really new to mention there. We just got to remember all these addresses over here were split up, right? We split them into, we borrowed 4 bits, so we went from okay, all these 1s and 0s, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And so this was a 24, and then we borrowed 4 bits, so now 28 prefix bits. 16 more networks with 14 hosts per network. So they were either connected to router 23 or 24, and we had this scenario. And the routers 15 through 21, actually we only went to 20. Switches we just went up to 30. In here we just went up to 6 with 6 combinations. Here we show an example of an access list. Access list 1, if we use numbers 1 through 99, that then gives us what we call a standard access list. Now a standard access control list only looks at the source. So here we're just looking at the source IP. So we say we're going to permit this network, and this is a wildcard mask. We're going to check these bits and ignore the 15. Where did that come from? Well, let me show you up here. So our network, we have in our last octet, here's the rest of the address, we borrowed 4 bits. So all of these bits are the host, and we want to ignore those because we want to talk about permit everything on this network. So we put 1s there, and they're going to ignore those hosts. Well, if you add that up, 8 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. That's where that comes from. So we're permitting that network, permitting this network, and then everything else is denied. That's called a wildcard mask. How we calculated that right there. Access control list. We only look at the source, one, and then next here, this is either a permit or a deny, and network, and what wildcard mask. So here's the network, and the wildcard mask tells us how much of that we're going to match. Not easy at first, but it'll be easier as we go along. One more day here to talk about. So this is week 10, day 18, 25th. Access control list, VLANs, work on access control list. Okay, for Wednesday. This information here is actually from the database class. Database management systems. This is our configuration that we've been working on, seems like forever. Alright, so we had a lab we're supposed to work on, and for some reason I never did figure out exactly. We had an issue with our connection, and so we rebooted these, cleaned them, configured them again, and everything's worked since. But the students started some working here on a lab. Okay? Couldn't get very far. But they did work on their other system. They spent a lot of time, and a couple of the key things there, I'll add a slide here. Things that they need to be thinking about. You should be able to now configure a multi-layered switch. You should be able to turn on, let me do this, IP routing. And then you should be able to configure a router port, right? You do that with a no switch port. We should be able to configure between devices a trunk, so VLAN information can be shared, and then inside here, that multi-layered switch, you should be able to configure VLANs with IP addresses, and those are called switch virtual interfaces. Alright, that's it.